My name is Sloan, and I am 28 years old. At my graduation party, the house was full of noise, laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of forced happiness that makes your chest feel tight instead of warm. I had spent 4 years fighting exhaustion, doubt, and the quiet fear that I was never enough, just to earn the diploma resting on the table beside the cake. Balloons brushed the ceiling, relatives I barely knew congratulated me, and everyone waited for my parents to say something. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment that makes everything worth it. My dad stood up, topped his glass, and smiled, but his eyes didn't look at me. They slid past me, straight to my younger sister, Isella, sitting across the room. He raised his glass and said words that still echo in my head. I wish it was you holding that diploma. You are the only child who has ever truly made me proud. The room went silent for a breath. Then awkward laughter followed, like people didn't know whether they had heard correctly. My mom nodded beside him, tight-lipped, like this was a truth that didn't need explaining. In that moment, the title of my life rewrote itself without my consent. At my graduation party, my parents said my sister was the only child worth celebrating. No one noticed when I left quietly. I picked up my purse, walked past the balloons, and stepped out into the cold evening air, my ears ringing, my hands shaking. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel, feeling smaller than I ever had. What hurt most wasn't just the words, it was how familiar they felt. This wasn't the first time Isella was the sun and I was the shadow. Growing up, she was the athlete, the golden smile, the one whose report cards were framed, while mine were good but not amazing. When I stayed up late studying, it was expected. When she succeeded, it was celebrated. I told myself for years that if I just worked harder, became better, achieved more, they'd see me. That night, I finally understood. They already had, and they still chose her. I drove until the lights of the city blurred, replaying my dad's toast over and over. The only child worth celebrating. By the time I got home, something inside me had gone quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt empty. And in that emptiness, a decision began to form, though I didn't yet know its shape. Over the next few weeks, the calls from my parents slowed, then stopped. No one asked why I had left early. No one apologized. My sister posted photos from the party online, smiling under a caption about family pride. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, saving every dollar, telling myself independence was the only applause I needed. Late at night, though, the words haunted me, especially the part that felt like a knife twisted slowly. You are the only child who has ever truly made me proud. I started asking myself dangerous questions. What if I stopped trying to impress them? What if I built a life that didn't need their approval at all? The thought scared me, but it also felt like oxygen. I remembered the final line people would later whisper about that night. No one noticed when I left quietly. What I did after that shocked everyone. Back then, no one knew, not even me, how true that would become. All I knew was that I was done begging for a seat at a table where I was never wanted. That graduation party wasn't an ending. It was the spark. And if you want to know how a woman who was told she wasn't worth celebrating turned silence into something that shook my entire family, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now, because what comes next changes everything. After that night, I disappeared from my parents' world without making an announcement. I didn't block them. I didn't send a dramatic message. I simply stopped chasing. Weeks turned into months, and in that quiet space, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I took a job no one thought was impressive enough, then turned it into an opportunity by outworking everyone in the room. I moved into a small apartment with peeling paint and thin walls, but it was mine. And every morning I woke up without the weight of trying to earn love, while my sister continued to live in the comfort of praise. I learned how powerful it is to survive without applause. I enrolled in additional certifications after work, studied until dawn, failed twice, passed on the third try, and kept going. Slowly, something shifted. People at work started asking for my opinion. Then they started trusting me with responsibility. Then they started promoting me. 2 years after that graduation party, I was offered a position that changed everything. One that paid more than my parents ever imagined I could earn. That's when the phone call started again. My mom suddenly wanted to catch up. My dad left voicemails filled with pride that sounded suspiciously new. Even Isella reached out, her messages carefully worded, as if she wasn't sure who I had become. I didn't rush to respond. I had learned that my worth didn't increase just because they finally noticed it. The real moment came when my parents invited me to a family dinner, saying they wanted to celebrate my success. Sitting at that table felt like stepping into a memory that no longer fit me. My dad cleared his throat just like he had at my graduation party and said, "We always knew you'd do something great." I looked at him calmly and replied, "No, you didn't. You told me I wasn't the child worth celebrating." The silence that followed was heavier than the one at my graduation. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and Isella looked down at her plate uncomfortable for the first time in her life. I wasn't angry anymore. I was honest. I told him how those words had shaped me, how leaving quietly that night was the moment I stopped living for their approval. I reminded them of the toast, the nod, the way no one noticed when I walked out. My dad tried to interrupt, but I finished what I needed to say. At my graduation party, my parents said my sister was the only child worth celebrating, until you needed someone to be proud of. That was the truth, and it landed hard. I didn't stay long after that. I wished them well and left with my head high, not because I had proven them wrong, but because I no longer needed to. The shock everyone talked about later wasn't my success or my money or my career. It was my peace. It was the fact that I didn't beg for validation anymore. Over time, my relationship with my sister changed. Without our parents' constant comparisons, we found a fragile honesty between us. She admitted she had always felt pressured to be perfect, afraid of falling from the pedestal I never wanted. We weren't close overnight, but we were real, and that mattered more. As for my parents, they learned slowly that love given conditionally comes at a cost. Sometimes I still think about that younger version of me sitting in her car outside her own graduation party, feeling invisible. I wish I could tell her this. The moment they told you that you weren't worth celebrating was the moment you stopped shrinking. No one noticed when I left quietly, but everyone noticed who I became after. And that is why this story doesn't end in bitterness. It ends in strength. Because being overlooked didn't break me.